Hi, everybody. I think I had just muted myself, but welcome to our webinar. We are getting started in just about a minute, right at 1 p.m. Eastern on the nose. You should be able to see our PowerPoint right now. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll get started in just a minute. Greetings, everyone. I have the time as 1 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar, Homelessness and Chronic Absenteeism in Rural Communities. We're going to be together for about the next 75 minutes. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Schoolhouse Connection, maybe this is your first webinar, welcome. We are a nonprofit working to overcome homelessness through education, through strategic advocacy and technical assistance. We work in schools, districts, with state education agencies, early childhood programs and post-secondary programs, other service providers, and also working with families and youth. We work directly with youth through our leadership and scholarship program. You can find more information about Schoolhouse Connection and all of our resources on our website. You can find the link right there. We also have a Facebook group. We really encourage you to join through the Facebook group. You have a great opportunity to directly interact with colleagues and ask questions and get tips and best practices. Definitely sign up for our newsletter. We're always sharing templates, guest perspectives, information about upcoming webinars, legislation. We often share information directly from our youth. It's a really great resource. As I mentioned, we also have a Q&A, and you can search our Q&A document for other folks' questions in case they have already asked what you're looking for. And as you know, since you signed up for this webinar, we host a ton of webinars, and all of our prior webinars are available for download or listening. So definitely check that out. This platform, this webinar platform only allows participants to listen in. The way that you can ask a question, if you have one, is by noting it in the questions pane. You should see the dashboard on the side of your screen, and you can enter that question, any questions that you have in the questions pane at any time. We will be getting to the questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. So don't fear if you ask and it's crickets from us. It's just because we're waiting until the very end. If for some reason we have an onslaught of questions and we don't have time to get to all of them before the end of the allotted time frame for the webinar, we make sure to save all of the unanswered questions and respond to them in a cohesive document that we then share on our website, along with the PowerPoint and the recording of the webinar. Right now, if you want to have a copy of the PowerPoint at your fingertips, if you go to the handout section of the dashboard, you'll see both a PDF of the PowerPoint, and below that is another handout, a resource page from our presenters, and they'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. But through that resources handout, you can get hyperlinks to some of the organizations and entities that they'll reference. My name is Katie Brown. My apologies for not introducing myself, and I'm the program manager here at Schoolhouse Connection for our Education Leads Home campaign, which is a partnership with a couple other entities, which I'll mention in a moment. We're the first and only national campaign that's seeking to build stronger futures for students experiencing homelessness from early education through post-secondary. And to that end, we have three very specific goals that all of our content and outreach and presentations and trainings address. The first is that young children will participate in quality early childhood programs at the same rate as their house peers by the year 2026. We address academic achievement from kindergarten through high school through 12th grade, and look at different academic achievement benchmarks and issues related to discipline and special education, et cetera. But one of the most definitive benchmarks we address in the K through 12 realm is the graduation rate. And we're pursuing a 90% graduation rate by 2030. And finally, in working with post-secondary students, we're aiming for 60% post-secondary attainment rate by 2034. You can learn more about our campaign and find a whole host of resources on our website, educationleadshome.org. This calendar year, our content has focused largely on issues of chronic absenteeism and identification. And accordingly, a lot of our briefs and tools and webinars and conference outreach has related to chronic absenteeism and identification. Just yesterday, we co-hosted a webinar with the National Association of Social Workers, also on chronic absenteeism, and our presenters focused on strategies for leveraging data and school-specific best practices for addressing chronic absenteeism as it relates to students experiencing homelessness. We have also addressed issues at the intersection of mentorship and chronic absenteeism for homeless students. We did another webinar that did a deeper dive in leveraging data related to chronic absenteeism. Regarding identification, you can look on our site for tools and archive webinars related to improving email communication within schools and districts to better identify students experiencing homelessness. We've looked at model school shelter partnerships, a whole, again, range and host of resources related to identification chronic absenteeism for the year 2019. So definitely check us out. We also have a great page with practitioner guest perspectives and youth voices. And we're lucky to hear from a young person with lived experience today during this webinar. We're always really excited to share their perspective. It's definitely, as I know everyone on the line can attest, the most powerful way of learning about our students. I mentioned that Education Leads Home is a partnership, so in including Schoolhouse Connection, our partners include the Institute for Children, Poverty, and Homelessness, which is based in New York City, Civic, America's Promise Alliance, and the Education Council. And we have our websites here so you can learn more about what we each do. We are getting ready to pass the baton. I'm so excited to have Sherry, Megan, and Oscar with us today from the Butte County Office of Education. I can let each of them talk a little bit more about what they do when they each begin their section of the presentation. They are lucky to all be in the same room together right now, so they're going to be passing the phone back and forth, but I think it's going to be great. It makes it much more conversational, excuse me. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass the baton to Megan. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Malloy, and I am the director of the School Ties and Prevention Department here at the Butte County Office of Education. We're located in Northern California. Oh, and I guess I should mention, I'm also the homeless liaison for the county, foster youth liaison, and I do some student wellness work and tobacco prevention, and I have been here for almost 16 years. So this first slide we have is just kind of giving you an idea of the environment that we're working in, doing this work here in Northern California. So we're located, we're about 90 miles north of Sacramento, and you can see on the map the red shape is our county. So we're inland, Northern California. We have a population of just over 200,000. But I also want to point out that around 50% of that number is located in Chico, which is our one kind of city or urban suburban community, and then the other half of the population is spread around in much more sparsely populated rural areas. Our student population is 32,000, and that's our K-12 population. We do have a community college here and a California State University campus in Chico as well. We have 13 school districts plus our County Office of Ed run programs. And of those 13 districts, 5 of them are fully unified K through 12 school districts. We have 1 high school only, 9 through 12. And then we have 3 smaller K-8 districts that are in more rural areas. And then I really wanted to point out, since we're focusing on rural issues today, we have 4 single districts. So 4 of our districts are just 1 school district. So as you can guess, there's a really small population, and those are in our very rural outskirt areas of our county. And then the other thing that's important to understand about our demographics here is we have a higher rate of families living at or below the poverty level than elsewhere in the state. The California state average is 13.3%, and we're at 18.6%. And this is from the last census data in 2010, so we're gearing up to do the 2020 census, and I anticipate this is going to be considerably higher, especially because we just hit the year anniversary of the worst, most devastating wildfire that has happened in California's history, which was in our county as well, in the community of Paradise. And I know that has impacted every part of our community in our county, and I know we're going to see an increase in this family poverty rate. And then the county unemployment rate is a bit higher than the state rate as well, and I also anticipate that to be showing up at a higher rate in this 2020 census. Definition, you can go to the next slide. The definition of student homelessness, I do think that most participants in this webinar have some basic knowledge about student homelessness and the Federal McKinney-Vento Act, but I just wanted to add this slide and let you all know you can certainly, I'm going to quickly go through the next few slides, but you can certainly ask questions in our Q&A time at the end if you have questions about the content on any of these slides. Essentially, there are 4 categories that we can identify students experiencing homelessness. The shared housing, which we also call doubled up, motels, hotels, shelters, or unsheltered. And what I want to highlight on this slide, in our county, around 80% of the students that we identify who are experiencing homelessness are in that shared housing category, that first bullet. 80%. And the reason for that is because we don't have a lot of shelter beds available, and especially family beds. The only shelters that we have for children and families are in Chico and not anywhere else in our county. And we don't have a youth homeless shelter at all. So what happens is families have to bounce around from friends and family, share housing, because there really aren't other options. Okay, this slide is just a brief overview of the McKinney-Vento Act. It was originally passed in 1987. It was our first federal piece of legislation to really address homelessness at all. Recently reauthorized when the No Child Left Behind Act was reauthorized in 2015 as the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. And there were some amendments in there that took effect in 2016. This is our federal law that works hand in hand with our Title I Part A and other federal education programs, and the Ed Code is listed there if you want to reference those. And I also just wanted to point out the main themes of ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, is identification, school stability, school enrollment, support for academic success, and we always want to be child-centered and always look at the student's best interest when we're making decisions, particularly about that enrollment and school stability. Okay, I guess I can go on this slide. The rights of homeless students, immediate enrollment, even without the records normally required, right to remain in school of origin, categorically, automatically approved for free or reduced price meals, including breakfast and lunch, transportation, no segregation. It shouldn't be obvious in your schools who is experiencing homelessness and who is not. Every district has to appoint a homeless liaison. There's a formal dispute resolution. And then I'll skip that bullet down to the full participation in all school activities and programs. And then in California, we have a few years ago passed a bill called AB 1806 that reduces graduation requirements. I'll talk about that on the next slide. But that has been a model policy, and I'm excited to share that and how that's worked. But before we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the identification and maybe not immediate enrollment, but identification of students. It can be really, really challenging in rural areas because of that reason that I already mentioned, that we don't have homeless shelters, we don't have food banks, we don't have nonprofits and service agencies we can partner with who are identifying student services. So the identification has to happen at the school site. And that's challenging because we don't have families showing up in our school offices and saying, "Hi, we're homeless, identify me." It really takes a lot of outreach from school staff and a deep understanding of the definition of homelessness, and also an understanding of how to talk to families to find out in a sensitive and compassionate way what the situation is, so families feel comfortable in sharing what their living situation is.
Megan, this is Katie. I'm going to go back I apologize for jumping the gun. If there was something you wanted to flesh out a little bit further on the ESSA theme slide.
I think I just did in talking about that identification. So with rural, I think it's the trickiest one because we know that we're under identifying students, and when we already have 80% of our students in those shared housing situations, it's hard to do the identification. I know some of my counterparts in more urban areas, they have partnerships with shelters and automatically get a list of students who are living in homeless shelters. When we don't have shelters, it's a lot harder to figure that out. And families don't always want to disclose that they're living in shared housing because they don't want to jeopardize the host family's housing if they're not allowed to have someone living there. It's tricky, it's a surmountable challenge, but it's tricky, and I think it takes some real specialized training. In training of office staff who don't always get those professional opportunities that teachers and instructional staff get. So we'll talk about that more in strategies, but that's one tip that I have for identification is making sure that everyone who has contact with students and families gets trained on the consent rights and how to identify.
Thank you so much, Megan. I'm going to switch to the next slide. And if I could ask you to speak a little bit closer into the phone. We've got a couple of folks commenting on the phone breaking up a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Katie?
A little bit better. I'm sorry, guys. It was breaking up just a bit. Let's try again.
Okay, maybe I can move a little bit to a different spot.
That was better. That's better. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for your patience while we iron out tech stuff.
Okay. So this slide I wanted to share this, I believe is a model policy. We've been implementing it for close to 4 years here in California, the AB 1806. And this is a state law that exempts any student who is experiencing and transferred schools anytime after their second year of high school. It exempts them from the district level graduation requirement. And then, so it's sort of a credit reduction. Sometimes we call it that, or we call it the AB 1806 graduation waiver. And then students are only required to complete the state minimum requirements for graduation, which in our state is 130 credits. Some of our school district requirements are as high as 240 credits. So it really reduces the number of credits students need to graduate. And I've just seen, the hope on students' faces and the optimism when they see that, wow, now I'm on track and I'm actually going to graduate with my class. They are awarded this this exemption only if they cannot reasonably finish the district level requirements by the end of their 4th year. They also have an option to stay in a 5th year even if they turn 19, if they want to do the district level requirement. Essentially what it does is eliminate the electives. So they're still getting all the core classes that the state of California has deemed this is a high school diploma. So regular California high school diploma. They would not be eligible to go straight into a 4-year college or university, but they would absolutely be eligible to go into a community college and then transfer, which is what a lot of our students do. And the intent of this is to help students whose homelessness has bounced them around from district to district, because our districts are not uniform in the way that they offer classes, the order that they offer classes, the number of credits they require. So it's really hard for students to stay on track when they've had to bounce around place to place and change schools. So this is for students who are experiencing homelessness and change schools after their 2nd year of high school and are not on track to finish within 4 years. I would be happy to answer more questions about this at the end if anyone has any. But I highly recommend, proposing this and lobbying for this in other states. I think it's really increased our graduation rate. I don't know the exact numbers, but just anecdotally, locally, we've had a lot more of our students making it to graduation, and then they go on to community college. So I'm really pleased with the implementation of this. And then just to give you a picture of what we're talking about here in our county as well, for the last several years, we have identified right around 1,500 students experiencing homelessness in our 13 districts plus our BCOE programs. That's K-12. It includes some preschool as well. I briefly mentioned the campfire that we went through last year on November 8th in Paradise, California. I think it was around 18,000 buildings were destroyed. The whole school district pretty much had to shut down. School buildings were burned. A lot of trauma, a lot of displaced families. So we don't have our numbers back yet, but I expect that to be more than double. So we're probably going to go from 1,500 to 3,000 students experiencing homelessness. And again, 80% of those students pre-campfire had been doubled up for sharing housing, and I think that's going to be increased too. One thing I'd like to share that I've been thinking about lately, maybe some kind of bright spot or silver lining out of this disaster that we went through. I have seen people in our community, our community at large, and in particular our school communities, really understand the doubled up and shared housing type of homelessness more than ever before because of all the homes that were lost. I don't know anyone in our community who wasn't impacted in some way, either hosting another family for a period of time or families having to live with other family members and friends. And it just really raised that empathy level after going through that experience to understanding like, oh yeah, this really is a challenge and a barrier and it's difficult, and this should actually be part of the student homelessness definition. Prior to this, I would still hear comments like, well, they're not really homeless because they're not living outdoors or in a shelter. But I think people are understanding now how that instability impacts every part of their life when they're having to be in someone else's space, sharing their kitchen, sharing their bathroom, not having enough space for everyone to sleep in. So I think that's a positive that I've sort of tried to focus on. And I think also our community has become a lot more trauma responsive and trauma informed, which helps all students, but particularly helps students who have experienced homelessness. I think that's all I have for that, and I'm going to pass the mic to Sherry.
Hi, this is Sherry Yanni. I am a program coordinator here at the County Office of Education. My time is somewhat split, but my primary role here is student attendance for all of our districts in the county, as well as supporting some of our charters. And I don't know if Megan mentioned we have about 18 charters here in Butte County. So quite a bit of our population served in that school setting as well. This is just the data that we pulled for this last year, and it shows where we're at as a county. I also compared it to our region, which is the north and east of us, part of California, so also very rural, and just gives you some comparison there, and then where we are compared to the state. I always like to look at our numbers more compared to region, because if you look at California as a state, Butte County is very different from our large urban areas like the San Francisco Bay Area or Los Angeles. So in comparison to other counties like us, we are a little bit higher with our homeless population and with our foster youth. Again, we don't have some of the services up here that other counties may have, and so we rely a lot on our schools to be those service providers in that. The other thing I would mention when we talk about the amount of students who are doubled up, we don't have a lot of available and affordable housing in Butte County for our families. So, excuse me, for example, after the Camp Fire, when we lost so many of our housing options in Paradise and a couple of our other very rural communities who were also impacted by that, there was not available housing at all, and especially affordable housing in Butte County. And so we do have a lot more of our families who are doubled up right now because that was the only option for them. So I'm going to go into a little bit more then on the attendance side of chronic absence and homeless in our rural areas. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So I put this slide in there just to show you about 2 years ago there was a change in the California Education Code and those duties of attendance supervisors. And the really big shift in that was we went to this promoting that culture of attendance and really wanting to be sure that we're accurately tracking our student attendance and then offering support services and interventions. The Ed Code had not been changed for quite a while, and it had much more of a sort of punitive approach to it. And so this change was really important in that it really focuses now on how we're supporting students and really accurately identifying who are the students who are experiencing chronic absence. Those 4 boxes along the bottom are really kind of the 4 different areas that those support services are targeted at, and I'll get into those a little bit more as we go on. The next slide will show you also our California statewide MTSS initiative. This was put in place about 3 years ago. Butte County collaborated with Orange County Department of Ed on a statewide grant to really roll out MTSS as the way that we organize all of our supports for students. And so most of you are probably familiar with that multi-tiered system of support, that we really want to look at what are we doing for all of our students. And when it comes to attendance, this is where we're really talking about building that culture of positive attendance and awareness. And then as we're identifying students who are having some minor attendance challenges, what are we doing for those students with supplemental support? And that's where we're really starting to identify what are some of the barriers that are getting in the way for our students being able to attend school regularly. And then we'll move on to those few students at that sort of upper tier of the triangle with those intensified supports. So those are kids who are really having the greatest struggle and really need a lot of direct support around attending school. In our rural area, we have a lot of our schools that really look at, when they identify a student as homeless, that they're going to start offering those supplemental supports right away. We're not going to wait and see how the attendance goes. We know that there's some barriers there and that they need some of that additional support. So once they're identified as homeless, some of those supplemental supports really become more of like a tier 1 for that student population. One example I'll share with you is we have a school that as soon as a student is identified as homeless in their student information system, those school counselors get an automatic email sent to them so they know who those students are and they check in with them to identify barriers before attendance becomes an issue for them. So when we go into those categories of supporting students around attendance, the first one on the next slide is promoting that culture of attendance. And really where we've been focusing a lot of attention in Butte County this year and kind of started last year was that top box that talks about that relationship building. We know from research that relationships between staff and students is really one of the top factors that influences not just their attendance, but their grades. It's really about that level of engagement and feeling safe and valued at school. So we really put a lot of emphasis into going out and doing trainings with school staff around relationships. I'm going to be doing one for a district later this afternoon that really focuses on how do we build strong relationships and really build that sense of community in your classroom and in your school. You can kind of read through this list of strategies that are identified in that education code. The ones that we really focus on in addition to the relationship building is really looking at positive messaging. We are currently creating a county-wide messaging campaign around attendance, and we're doing it in a way that we can then tailor it to any specific student group we want. So we'll be able to have some specific messaging for our homeless population around school attendance. Most of our districts are participating in that state initiative for the MTSS rollout, so really looking at what supports and strategies they have in place. And then as Megan talked a lot about our trauma responsive practices, and we're also looking at that when it comes to discipline practices, and that can disproportionately impact our homeless students if we're seeing behaviors around the trauma they've experienced and not understanding that. We don't want schools to be using punitive discipline practices when what they really need is support. We have schools that really work on just that welcoming environment. So some of our schools, I know up in Paradise, when they reopened, rather than having the main office, they have the Student Welcome Center. So even just sort of rebranding those as this is a place that we welcome our students and our families. And then again, Megan had mentioned training for all of our staff around homelessness and identification, but also around how we support attendance. So those are some of the key areas we're working on here in Butte County. We do trauma responsive training, not just for our teachers, but also for all of our classified staff, so our cafeteria staff, our bus drivers, everyone who's coming in contact with students has an opportunity to participate in those kind of professional development opportunities. When we talk about our data on the next slide, we're really looking at, are we identifying accurately who is experiencing chronic absence? We have a lot of schools who now have site teams who look at their data, and so one of the things we're recommending is we look at what teams you already have and which ones will specifically look at your attendance data, and looking at it by student group as well as individual level data. So we're not just identifying who the kids are, but are there certain populations of students we need to be focusing more attention on? And then what are the supports that are offered early before attendance becomes a big issue? Like Megan said, we don't have a lot of other organizations who are identifying our students who are homeless. So it really comes down to our schools looking at that. And sometimes it's because of attendance issues that those students are being identified when they come in and start talking about their situation. And then we realize they maybe are doubled up and didn't realize they qualify for some extra services because of that living situation. And then another big one that we focus on with all of our districts is that outcome data. If we're going to be implementing these strategies, we want to do it with fidelity. We want to know that what we're doing is working because we have such limited resources here. We really can't afford to be doing things if we're not getting the results we want from them. The next slide will just show you, if you're not familiar with the new California school dashboard, this is what it would look like if you pulled up a certain district. And so this is actually the chronic absenteeism. And this last year was the first year that chronic absenteeism was included in the dashboard. So we don't have comparison data yet. The next release of this will be the first week of December. So then we'll have 2 years of chronic absenteeism data and we'll be able to do some comparison. But this is what it would look like if you went into that dashboard and pulled up a specific district. It would tell you where you're at for chronic absence with all students in that upper corner, and you can see they are in the yellow range. And then it will break it down by those student groups that we've been referring to. So that top middle one you can see has foster youth and homeless youth, and all of those are in the orange, so not doing as well as the overall student group. So what you're really striving for is to be in the blue. Green is really good too, but as you're moving more into the orange and red, there's some system-wide issues that probably need to be addressed there. So this is what schools initially look at when we're looking at data, and then there's some options to drill down a little bit more into those numbers, but I just wanted to give you a picture of what you would see on the dashboard if you were to pull that up. And then moving into how we respond to those, I'm not going to read through all of these. You can go through them and ask questions if you want. We also have our contact information at the end if you want to follow up after the webinar. But a couple of these that are specific to homeless students, I will let Megan talk about as she oversees that piece. The first one, though, we do share a case manager who's split between homeless education and our attendance program. So she's half-time in each of those, but really it overlaps a lot. But again, that's one case manager we have to serve our whole county when it comes to the attendance piece of this.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. This is Megan again. Yeah, I do think that I wish we could have more case managers doing that, but splitting the role between the attendance and homeless education program has really helped us to identify students, like Sherry was saying earlier, that we may not have known about until they start going through the attendance support program, and then we find out, oh, you're missing school because you're having to stay with your aunt across town and can't get here. And then we can come in with we're going to identify you, make sure you get transportation. Some of our school districts have employed what they call targeted case managers at school sites, and we sort of use them as school site liaisons rather than what's required by law, which is the district level liaison. Usually our district level liaison is someone who's in the district office and is in more of an administrative role rather than working directly with. I think it's a great best practice to try, if you can, to identify school site liaisons, because those are the people who really get to know the families and the students and can help with that identification, making sure that homeless students are getting services, particularly nutrition, going out to places where families may be frequenting is really important, and this is actually under the new the reauthorization of ESSA, districts are required to do this. Then again, in our area, outside of Chico, we don't have homeless service providers. We don't have a broad social service network. We don't have foundations with deep pockets. We don't have advocacy groups. So we have to go to places that you wouldn't necessarily think of going to put up flyers that say, hey, these are the McKinney rights. Are you living in one of these situations? So we're going to whatever there is in the community. Sometimes it's just one grocery store, a convenience store. So we want to do flyers there, places that people go to do laundry. Really aware that the public spot are. And I also want to take this time to say, typically use the term homeless or create communities when we're talking to families. Back to that issue.
Megan, it's Katie. I'm sorry to interrupt you. They're breaking up just a little bit.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It seems like I keep on picking on you.
No, that's fine. No, it's fine. Maybe it's the way
I just want to make sure that I think is a little bit better. Yeah, there was a little while where we were kind of garbled. Sure can. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Okay, so I was saying that under ESSA, it's a requirement to do outreach in the communities to places where families experiencing homelessness may be. In our rural communities, we don't have a broad web of social services. So we need to go to grocery stores, laundromats, gas stations, whatever public spaces there are in our communities. And then I also think it's important to be thoughtful about the kind of language that goes on these outreach materials, rather than using the word homeless, which, as I said earlier, many families won't self-identify. We like to say, are you in transition? Are you in stable housing? What does your living situation look like? Those kinds of terms instead of that label of homelessness, and we found that to be more effective in identification, especially in our rural areas. In urban areas where families are checking into a homeless shelter, I think they're more willing or see themselves, yes, I'm homeless, I'm going to check that box. But in our doubled up situations, that term can be a little alienating, so we don't always want to use that. We have hosted a Back to School Connect event, which is modeled after Project Homeless Connect, which a lot of homeless continuums of care do around the country. We focused it on K-12 students, and the idea was to get all of our service providers, even though it's minimal, the ones that we do have all together in one spot to make sure that students have what they need to go back to school, school supplies, connection to any of the resources that we do have. We had online enrollments happening there. We had a wonderful team of haircuts, and it was so great. We just had a whole line of students getting clothes, shoes, getting backpacks, and that was great because it is hard for our families in rural areas to get around to all of these different locations. So having that one-stop shop, I think it's a great idea. For our high school students and even our middle school students, we've really tried to link to our higher education partners in the county to work on that preparation for moving into community college or Chico State. They have student support programs there, and we've taken our students out to events that are on college campuses so they can connect with those student groups. And we've done some partnerships where we do some fun activities with college students as well. A few years ago, we started a homeless youth task force, and that has been a great place for our youth to get engaged and do some civic engagement, and also for us to raise up their voices on our youth advisory board. And then we take back we have monthly meetings, and then we report back to our local homeless continuum of care. This has been effective in kind of getting student homelessness and youth homelessness maybe at the table or on the agenda with our local homeless continuum of care, which is our HUD-funded programs, which again are limited, but we do have HUD-funded housing programs, which in the past have been mostly focused on single adult chronic homelessness. And I think by creating this youth advisory board and this homeless youth task force, we've sort of inserted ourselves into that conversation more. So I highly recommend doing that. And it's a great experience for our students too. And we did just get recognized as an official subcommittee of our local homeless continuum of care. So I'm pretty proud of that and really proud of our students. Last night and last week, our students went to two of our local city councils, and the city made a formal proclamation acknowledging November as Homeless and Runaway Youth Month. And so that was really cool for our students to see that and talk with our local elected officials and lawmakers, and that was covered by the local news. So that was a great experience for some youth development too. I think that's all that I had for that. Getting those materials out is really important, flyers, posters. We have some from the state, and we have some other models that I think it's been best for us to make, customize them for our local needs. So I'd recommend doing that too. And engaging with the local homeless continuum of care too. And even if you're not being invited, invite yourself and get there and bring your youth and make your own seat at the table idea. And then I'll pass this off to Sherry.
Katie, I think in the interest of time, I want to make sure that Oscar's able to tell his story, because I think that's probably the most valuable piece of this. So if we can jump ahead to that now, and then if we need to come back to these slides, we can. But as people review them on their own, they can also ask us any questions by email. So I'd like to go ahead and move to Oscar's story at this point, if we could.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and flip through these so people can see what they were describing. And we can return, if we have additional time, here some information about student level responses to attendance issues. I know you guys were going to go through push versus pull out factors for attendance. So again, we can come back there if we have time, and I know that people can always email you separately. And I'm so excited to introduce Oscar. Oscar, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Oscar. So I'm a former foster youth and a homeless youth. Faced a lot of chronic homelessness when I was young. I can remember being a kid. First memories was growing up in a tool shed. So I know the challenges of that is. I know I grew up as a city kid in San Diego, but I know a lot of the challenges that kids face here out in rural areas is probably even bigger, because I remember being as a kid schools is the first place that you always gather your resources, right? It's the first place that you want to know, where you can get help, how you can get help, and who you can get help from. But in rural areas, especially now that it's been compounded by the fire, some of those families can't get that help. Some of those resources that the schools were there are no longer there. And where do those families go to, and how do they get those resources, and how do they reach out to the people and that can get them those kinds of resources, right? Because I remember while I was young, I could never imagine the enormity of the problems that I had without the support of my teachers and my counselors, right? And I can always think being young, I went through 10 schools up to ninth grade. I lived in a very chaotic and disruptive home, and I didn't know who to turn to. And it's always great to have the connection to a mentor, a teacher, or a counselor that you can really grasp onto. Because I think while you're growing up in that kind of situation, you really need to have somebody to turn to, right? Because you feel like in your own life, you can't control your living situation, but at least you can control your education. And for myself, having that background, I'm graduated from Chico State. Now I'm working with the Butte County Office of Education for the last 4 years and giving that experience back to my students and, giving them a hope, really, and showing that they can really break the cycle of trauma and homelessness for themselves. Because I really believe that, I don't have to be homeless for the rest of my life, right? I'm 34 years old now, and I can finally say I broke that cycle. I found a great job. I got a great education, but it just took that tenacity and the will to self-advocate, which I think is highly important to really teach our kids and our students to really go out and reach those resources that are important, to really speak for themselves, and to allow educators, school staff, to have that open environment with their students, so because they need to build that trust, right? Especially when you have a cycle of abuse and mistrust, that really shapes how your relationships comes out, and really skews the abused child's mind to have a very narrowed scope of survival. So you navigate to the things that give you the immediate forms of self-satisfaction. For me, education was my way out, right? So I really went out of my way to talk to my teachers. Stayed at after school. I actually had one teacher teach me Italian for one summer because I just couldn't live at home. It was just got too chaotic and got out of hand. Um, and again, I have to say that educators and school staff need to know that the smallest compassionate moments can have the longest moments in a child's life. These becomes the very critical anchors in which a child can guide themselves to, hopefully, to healthier life choices. Abuse can happen when you don't want it to, and becomes important to also teach kids about reaching out to the people that they feel comfortable with, right, and getting the right resources. Also, checking up on your students is important, especially when there's a cycle of constant absenteeism. And I see that a lot, too, with my students here because, when you're moving around and you don't know, especially when your parents, I remember my mom, she was always in constant survival mode, and she was always moving around from place to place. That's the thing you're thinking about is your own survival, how to move on, how to get on to the next place. And sometimes you don't think about the opportunities that your child is missing out. I remember I missing out. I didn't get to go to high school. I didn't finish high school. I have a piece of paper that tells me Oscar Rodriguez has enough credits that is equivalent to a high school diploma. So I didn't get to graduate the same norm as every other kid, and that kind of created a stigma for me growing up. But I just feel that these kids nowadays really need to have the opportunity to feel that they can really do anything for themselves. And this is okay. I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say next. So this really slowed me down in school, and then the chaos in my home is overwhelming. I finally got myself educated and really trying to bring that message to other kids. Well, using their full potential. And I always like to remember that, give your students the keys to the rise to the utmost potential, lift them to newer heights, and set them aloft beyond the entrapments of their past. There is nothing like the power and love of an educator can give on to their students as your own dreams are passed down to them and you let them grow. Also, you don't know the progress you can make in a child's life, but if you allow them to have a healthy, trusting environment in which allows your students to grow and learn, then you can give them the opportunity, the key to their success that will allow them to choose breaking a cycle, albeit an unknown path, but one of their own choice. And this is what the most important thing that I give my students is that choice to change your life, even though everything around them is so chaotic. Yeah.
Thank you, Oscar. If people have questions for him, please put them in the chat box, and he'll be able to answer those for you. Katie, if we want to go back to the responding to attendance issues on the student level slide, then I know we've talked about a lot of these, but I just want to sort of talk about it in terms of rural. These, again, are what a lot of these come out of the current legislation around duties of attendance supervisors. But in Butte County, transportation can be one of the biggest barriers, and just access to the supports that they need. So, for example, out in some of our very remote areas where we have those single school, single districts, a lot of those students do have bus transportation, but that school bus might be picking them up somewhere between 6 or 7 a.m. And it might be that the road where the bus gets to is a mile down, they're a mile down the dirt road. So they've got to get down to where the bus picks them up at a very early time. And that's just the reality of rural when they have multiple pickups that are miles apart, that the bus comes that early. And so if they even can get to the bus stop on time, they can get the bus. If not, and they miss the bus, for a lot of our families, they have no other option of how to get these kids down to school. Most of them, if they do have a running vehicle, there's one vehicle that's shared between whoever's living in that household, which could be grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles. So that's a big barrier for a lot of our kids who live out in those more remote rural areas. Even within our more populated communities, we don't have very reliable or very far-reaching city bus lines. So if they are close to the city bus, we can provide bus passes to them. But for a lot of them, that's not even an option because of where they're living. We just don't have the type of public transportation that a larger suburban or urban area might have. So if we can, we provide those, but oftentimes that's not even an option. We also have families, only one running vehicle. If they need to go to town because somebody has a doctor's appointment, they're going to do everything they need to do in town that day because they don't have the financial resources to go back and forth multiple days. Sometimes they're not going to get back up to the school until after school gets out and can't pick their kids up. They just take the whole family with them. If there's a medical appointment for a child, again, they may be gone the whole day because if they're going to take that child to the appointment, that's their one opportunity to go into town, maybe that week, maybe for a couple of weeks. So they're going to do everything they need to do on that one trip in. Again, resources, they can't keep filling the car up with gas to do that. So transportation becomes a big barrier for our families for a number of different reasons. One example we had yesterday, an attendance hearing where a grandmother was raising a little first grader, and he was missing a lot of school. He also was getting there very late. Grandma came in with the little boy's aunt, and aunt shared with us she's also living in the home with her children. They're raising the other sister's kids because they left to go find work elsewhere. This aunt is driving 6 kids to school every morning, and they attend 5 different schools. The only one who could take public transportation was her high schooler, so we did provide bus passes to her. We can provide gas cards to help pay for all the gas that she's using to do this route twice a day, but that doesn't help her with the time and scheduling piece of trying to now get 5 kids to 4 different schools that are located all over town. And so trying to move a couple of those kids to other schools, but there's no room for them. So it's trying to work out those kind of barriers for a lot of our families. And again, not having the type of public transportation that other larger areas may have, there just isn't another option for this aunt right now other than driving all these kids to the different schools that they're attending. So that's just another example of kind of what we're working with in our community. And if you want to go to the next one, I'll kind of end on this push versus pull factors for attendance. This is one of the ways that we kind of look at it when we're doing our attendance meetings and identifying barriers. Are there things that are pushing our students out of our schools? Are these feelings of being ignored and unsafe and not belonging happening in our schools? And are they experiencing some of these things in our schools? If that's what we identify as an issue, then we have a systems problem that we need to be addressing. If schools are really tracking their data and are identifying that a lot of these are the reasons why students are attending school, then we know we need to work with that system to make some changes so students will feel comfortable coming. If it's a pull-away factor, that's something else that's maybe happening for that student, like Oscar shared about some of the barriers he faced that are really pulling him away from school. Are there other family obligations? We have quite a few of our students who end up doing child care for other family members' kids so that they can go to work, because we just don't have a lot of child care options here in Butte County. So they're using maybe those high school students to do the child care, and they're not making it to school. It might be caring for a grandparent who's having some physical health issues, and they're the only one who can stay home and provide care to them. So a lot of different things that are pulling our students away from school. It could be mental health issues. We identify a lot of our students with anxiety and depression, like a lot of schools do, but access to support for that is really limited here in Butte County. We don't have a lot of those private nonprofits that our families can go to, especially if they're Medi-Cal families. They really only have behavioral health as their option here. So those are some of those pull-away factors, and then we know we need to work with that student and that family to try and figure out ways that we can mitigate some of that. Just like this aunt was needing to drive all of these students to school, we can try to work with her to figure out, are there other options we have for them. And then we really want to look at what are those pull-in factors. What are we doing in our schools that make our students want to be there? Because just that desire to be there, that feeling of belonging can really help overcome some of those other barriers for them, and just place that importance on the fact that they're in school. So that's where we're doing a lot of our professional development, and I talked about really kind of focusing on relationship building, which I think Oscar mentioned in his, just having that relationship with those school people made such a difference for him. So working on, can we increase our pull-in factors with that engagement and support for students in our schools, because for a lot of our young people, that is where those barriers like homelessness are being identified, and it's where a lot of those initial supports are happening for them. So I think that concludes our part of this presentation. We did talk about some barriers and challenges. I think we've sort of referred to a lot of these as we've gone through our presentation. Anything you want to add, Megan, on those? These are just considerations we look at with our schools. Their LCAP is their local control accountability plan, and that's really where they lay out what they're going to be doing to support students and how they're going to fund those things, and they have to revisit that every year. So we want to make sure that there's goals in there around attendance and around supporting their homeless students. We want to make sure, again, that they're looking at that data regularly and really drilling down to those student groups, and then being able to use their data to maybe identify what some of those root causes of the poor attendance are, and if that's homelessness, then how are we going to address that? And really looking at our students and families as one of our resources. I think oftentimes we forget to ask them what would help. We kind of come together as the professionals and try to solve these problems, and we really need to give them a voice at that table. And then we are really looking at our policies and procedures and how are we being supportive rather than punitive. We also have our statewide data system that talks about when you enroll and exit students, and we're trying to come up with really clear practices so we're not exiting students and then they just sort of disappear and nobody even knows that they're out there. So really wanting to look at those policies and procedures that impact our students, specifically our really vulnerable groups like our foster and homeless. And then those tiered supports we covered already. And then I believe that next page, that's one of our quotes that I know Megan uses quite a bit in their programming. And then if you want to go on to the next one. So this is that resource page that is in the handout. There's a PDF. Each of the graphics in there, not the label underneath, but the actual graphic, there will be a hyperlink to that resource. And these are some of the ones I share out with our districts when they're looking for different strategies. The blue attendance playbook that's down there is a new one that just came out in September, and it really gives some specific examples of places who are implementing those strategies. So that's a really good resource for people to look at there. But all of these are ones you can click on, and it will take you to that either website or that document. And then I believe we have our contact information, our emails on the next slide. If anybody has other questions after we do the Q&A that they would like to send to us, please feel free to do that.
Sherry, thank you so much. And Oscar, I didn't want to be presumptuous and include your contact information, but if you feel that you want to share it, and if people want to reach out to you personally and you're open to answering those questions, just let me know and I can provide that with our other materials. Yeah. Thank you so much to everybody. We now have about 11 minutes for Q&A. If for some reason we don't get to all of the questions, as I mentioned before, don't worry. We save all of the questions and I'll distribute them to our panelists so that they can answer the questions in writing, and or if they're open to it, you can reach out to them personally. So I'll go ahead right now and read the questions in the order that they came in, and Sherry, Megan, and Oscar can sort of tag team in answering them. Our first question, for rural communities that don't have RHY funding, is there any way to establish a system of funding or outreach, both street and community, to strengthen identification and access? And they continue to say too many youth falling into absenteeism risks, increased disconnection to school systems, which are often the only real source for homeless youth service in rural communities. So again, the initial question was, for rural communities that don't have RHY funding, is there any way to establish a system of funding or outreach, both street and community outreach, to strengthen identification and access?
Hi, this is Megan. I'll take that. I do know the RHY funding, Runaway Homeless Youth funding. In Chico, we do have that, but it doesn't provide a traditional shelter. It provides kind of a host home model where students can stay for up to 30 days in a licensed foster home. And a lot of our homeless youth don't want to actually do that. We have a great drop-in center, so in Chico, but yes, no RHY funding in other areas. And this is a tricky one, and I wish I had an answer for that, but I think just getting creative, maybe trying to utilize other workforce development or job programs to hire youth experiencing homelessness to form little outreach teams. So their job could be a youth outreach worker. We have done that here in Chico, not in some of our more rural areas. Engaging with the local homeless continuum of care to find out if there is any way to maximize those resources. And then maybe we're trying to build up a local housing trust, and we're just trying to keep a seat at the table to remember youth and remember student homelessness, because those are more flexible funds, or maybe something like that. An outreach team could be used. Or maybe just a club at a high school campus that would be who's interested in doing that kind of outreach. I think the question was about doing like outreach to youth to identify them. So I think just having to get creative and utilize programs and teams that are already there, get a seat at the table, get involved, show up at their coalition meeting, show up for them on the work that they're trying to do, and then maybe use some of those existing student programs to do outreach for homeless youth. I hope that's somewhat helpful. I like all these ideas. I want to try to do these myself.
Thank you so much, Megan. The next person asks, I know that in New York, rural communities who can access the program funding can establish host home systems. I know that the Coalition for Homeless Youth has a manual on establishing host homes, as does Point Source. Unfortunately, there is a severe lack of funding for programs to support these youth and or the host home volunteers. Is there a presentation curricula for training communities to build strategies for our, the word is cut off, I think, to build strategies for engagement, I think.
That I'm not sure. I think I'll bounce that one back to you, Katie. If you know of any manual on developing host home models, we don't have one here that we use.
I believe it's James who asked this. James, I'm not sure about manuals, but one of Education Leads Homes, one of our current projects, we awarded grants to 6 grantee states this year to implement state-specific projects related to student homelessness. And one of the grantee states is Oregon, and their work addresses the expansion of host home programs throughout the state. It's a program called Second Home that was initially started through Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. So I don't think we're going to get to all of the questions today, so I can, in our Q&A table, I can include some information and contact information in there for you, and you can also feel free to email me separately. I also know that there is a pretty robust host home program in different parts of Minnesota and in Washington State. So again, if you reach out to me, I can share some of those resources for you. Go ahead. Let's see the next question. Can anyone? James is asking if anyone can access the dashboard, and I think we covered that. Next person states, I have expertise conducting and implementing rural outreach models for homeless youth, which includes a unique form of community mapping. This also includes peer participation. It looks like they admit may have been a comment. I don't know, Sherry or Megan or Oscar, if you want to reflect on that in terms of community mapping and encouraging peer participation, and what if you have anything like that in Butte County.
We don't. We did have some peers doing youth outreach in Chico some years back, but if the person who shared that comment would like to email me, I would love to connect and find out what they're doing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see. This question, I believe, is directed to Oscar, and the person states, you mentioned choices. What kind of choices, and who provided these choices?
Hi, Oscar here. Choices. Yeah, I think the people that provided me these choices were my teachers. Because my teachers somehow understood that I was going through some problems at home. This was going on during middle school. And then they saw that I didn't talk to a lot of kids. I was a loner. Kids used to pick on me. But my teachers noticed that I was really receptive to the material that was being presented, and not only that, that I saw that I was open to staying even after school. And then that's when they started to really talk to me, really started seeing who I was, and what kind of what kind of help I needed, And one of my teachers noticed that I wasn't doing too well at home, and sometimes she would pick me up from home because my mom was going through some trouble. Sometimes I had to stay home so my mom can get help, so I can translate for her. And that's sometimes that would be an issue because I would skip out on school, and I would have to drop out sometimes. But yeah, I think that's what helped me out a lot is the teachers were the ones that allowed me to see what a healthy relationship looks like. Because I grew up in a very dysfunctional home where there was a lot of abuse going on. So I didn't know what a typical normal relationship is. So to me, to have that kind of being modeled, very healthy and a very, I guess you could say, educational environment allowed me to see what do I need to model myself after, and not after, what I'm seeing at home. And that gave me more curious just to see what is it that I really want and not what I'm, doing right now.
Oscar, thank you so very much. Our next question states, in our rural area, minors cannot ride public transportation. Can you elaborate on the creative transportation strategies that you've used to remove transportation barriers for homeless families? In particular, how have you helped homeless families without access to personal or public transportation my Q&A field is doing. Without access to personal public transportation to attend school conferences and other school programming?
This is the ongoing challenge, and I feel you, whoever left that question or comment. It is a huge challenge. Thankfully, minors are allowed to ride our city or county bus here, but we don't send the little ones on the city bus. We do purchase adult passes, parent passes, along with child passes, so the parent can ride with the child if that works and it works with their schedule. Other than that, the gas cards, but that of course only works if a family has a vehicle, a reliable vehicle, and has the ability to drive and get there. We have found partnered with bicycle programs that take donated bikes and refurbish them, and we've bought bicycle locks and helmets and bicycles for students. Sometimes the distance is too far and that doesn't really work. Other than that, and people say, oh, you could try Uber. Well, yeah, we don't have Uber in our rural areas either. The only other thing that we have done is gotten creative with ride shares with other family members that are attending the school, especially if there's a connection through an extracurricular activity. We've actually had staff drive kids and pick up kids, which can get very tricky with unions and with, but we've done it sometimes out of there's no other choice. At one point, there was a small cab company here in our county that was called Cabs for Kids. That's a great business idea if anyone wants to start that up. I'm sure the insurance and liability issues are things that will have to be worked around. But that's about it. I would love to know if anyone has any other ideas. I mean, it truly is an ongoing challenge, and every case is a little bit different, and we're always scrambling to find out how do we get our kids to school and the parents to conferences and IEP meetings. But we will provide those gas cards and bus passes, and that's kind of our go-to at this point.
Megan, thank you so very much. That was actually our last question. Again, I know that our presenters are open to receiving correspondence from everybody. Also, feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions. We are going to be planning a webinar related to issues at the intersection of chronic absenteeism and truancy, and that's slated for early 2020, so either January or February, so stay tuned for that. We also had some rich discussion today about the value of relationships and data, and as I mentioned, we have a lot of materials related to both of those topics of the intersection of chronic absenteeism and student homelessness, so feel free to check those out. Thank you so very much to our presenters. Special thank you to Oscar. We really enjoyed listening from all of you today and gleaning from your expertise. And thank you to all of our participants. Keep your eye out for a follow-up email with some survey questions. And again, you can link to all of these materials on our website. Have an absolutely wonderful day.
Katie,